here. Okay. Welcome, class. We will now start part 3 of the slides, and we'll have a discussion after the slides after I talk about part 3 of the path to an ecological future for humanity, continuing the cultural creatives theme. And I'm starting with a screen saying that we will examine an emerging alternative worldview and explain why and how a new culture rooted in a dynamic relational universe is emerging. I put this book on the slide, Relational Realities. I think it's the last major book that Charlene Spretnak is the author. She is an amazing woman who's from Upper Arlington originally, and has written many books. She's a co-founder of the Green Party many years ago. I don't think she's involved as much in that now, but I do highly recommend her as she's still active. She lives in San Francisco and she's doing podcasts. So she's a really amazing woman. And well, we'll get into this a little bit later. See if the next slide works. Well, okay. Did I do it right? Yeah, okay. I guess, all right. New sciences support a radical new view of the universe. Now, the point about the sciences is that in the part 2, what we talked about was a view of the universe that was based upon traditional science, separating ourselves as an individual and as a species even from nature. We kind of ended part 2 by talking about the definition from the Oxford English Dictionary, defining nature basically as everything except us. And that separation is kind of built in to where we are. And I have this little quote from the article: the universe has about 100 billion galaxies, and each human brain contains about the same number of neurons and cells. This reality diverges radically from our ordinary picture of ourselves as being a tiny speck in a vast universe out there. And that's why the picture of the Buddha-like thing, and we're going to see why the atomic image is there, because we'll think about those connections. I guess I have to do with this. Okay. Okay, I don't know that I mentioned this particular book. I may have in the article, but well, I know I mentioned Fritz Capra, who's one of the early authors or physicists who looked at the connection between the world they were seeing and understanding through quantum physics and the macro, the astrophysics, trying to figure out, whoa, this is very new, and what is that connection? We're going to have to change our experience of things in a more holistic way. And the sciences is not just the physics. I say in the text there, the new sciences of quantum physics, space-time, and relativity theory, evolution of self-organizing systems, chaos theory, fractal geometry and fractal math, cell biology, immunology, the microbiome, epigenetics, etc., all challenge the story of separation and are giving rise to a holistic, relational, collaborative view of our human awareness and consciousness that is integral to the universe itself. One of my favorite people, Brian Swimme. Before I get to the quote, this is really right out of the article, many physicists and philosophers have challenged the traditional view of Western science and have openly speculated that consciousness was somehow integral with the creation of the universe. So we're going to talk a lot in this section about consciousness. Not to solve the hard problem of consciousness, but to make the case that we need to bring consciousness into our experience of the quote external reality in a way that's going to be different. Cosmologist Brian Swimme puts it this way: our ancestry stretches back through the life forms and into the stars, back into the beginnings of the primeval fireball, which he called, that's his term for the Big Bang. This universe is a single, multiform, energetic unfolding of matter, mind, intelligence, and life. Now, this is also this is a different image, but I'll talk a little bit about the gentleman at the bottom of the page there. This dramatically new view of reality is gradually supplanting the traditional scientific view of separation and division between mind and the material world. The dynamic relational universe of quantum physics opens up an entirely new world of possibilities. All the more so if consciousness is bound up in how we understand our relationship with nature and with each other. Suddenly, the vast universe out there is inside us, an integral experience that opens the door to spirituality and William James's radical empiricism, speaking of philosophy. I mentioned that and recommend that this is a classic book, probably 100 years ago, at least, Varieties of Religious Experience. Now, what's significant about that, William James is known as a great pragmatist and a philosopher in the tradition of John Dewey. He preceded him. But the idea is he collected in his book, and it is free, it's a free ebook now, it was written a long time ago, no copyright, different alternative experiences that people have other than the ordinary, I'm a separate person from you and everybody else. The fact that you're on the screens over there is a pretty different reality that we were experiencing already. But it's a breakthrough book. It's a tour de force in the sense that the most of science did not deal with anything called subjective experience. They were dealing with objective reality. Tammy was talking about this, the interest in science, and so he's the forerunner of really all of the New Age work that's happened when people talk about creating new experiences by plumbing the depths of where we are, our dreams, our visions, and choosing our future, or taking all drugs, psychedelic drugs, which result in a different experience. Anyway, speaking of tongues, he catalogs all these amazing different experiences that we have subjectively and says, if you're going to be an empirical science, folks, you need to include awareness and consciousness. So that was pretty radical at the time, and it's still radical, as you'll see if you, I put a link in the article to this dialogue between Alan Wallace, who's a Buddhist scholar, and Sean Carroll, who's a theoretical physicist. And it's a great example of something right up to the minute now, and we'll get into more of this in part 4. But what we have is a situation where Alan Wallace is quoting physicists who have made the transition to saying, oh, you know, this is really more complex than we thought. The objective world out there is not looking like the one that's outside us. And so, and I mentioned all those examples. So, and he's ironically quoting to the physicist who is an astrophysicist. So Sean Carroll, they go back and forth, and Sean Carroll is saying, you know, he agrees that all of the knowledge we get from quantum physics, but that's it. That's what we know. And anything outside that is not anything he's willing to buy into. My point being that we still have this very strict division between scientists. Most scientists today are pretty much on the old traditional science objective world out there, and we're trying to make interventions in that situation, whether it's mentally or physically or interventions in the environment. All of those are separate from our subjective world. And so it's very interesting to see that dialogue. I recommend doing it. Okay, so now I put this screen out here because the image of a tree, but if you look closely, you probably, maybe you can't see all of this or not, but it's everything from what we traditionally think of as ecology and, you know, species interaction, habitat, environment, conservation, all of those things are true. But it also includes, and climate includes genomics and DNA and speciation, and so all, it's from bacteria, pathogens. It's everything is now ecological context. Okay, so and I'm using that. I think I called it something like bridge to ecology. Ecology is a bridge to a new story of evolution. And so the Biological Dictionary offers numerous examples of how ecology is now used in diverse disciplines: molecular ecology, organismal ecology. And by the way, I've had communications and involved the people at Ohio State University who have a department specifically on the evolution and organismal biology. So, and these guys are studying mushrooms, and it's pretty amazing that this is going on. Cognitive ecology, population ecology, community ecology, ecosystems ecology, and now extends to human ecology, urban ecology, rural ecology, landscape ecology, media ecology. We'll do more on that later. Historical ecology, and there's a program on art and ecology at the University of New Mexico. You get the idea. So, and I use this slide as an example, just one of where, let's say you want to look at agriculture. You can't just say, okay, you know, we plant seeds and grow food and get it out there. Now there's a very deep context, and we need to understand agroecological approaches, types of non-polluting. So I use this as one example of just applying a little bit of this ecological thinking to food. Biodynamic agriculture, permaculture, methodology designed for sustainable systems, community-supported agriculture, which is a new localized way to support your local farmer. And that's just one slide, and I just use it as an example. You could have a slide to illustrate any of these versions of ecology. And so I think there's that's a key part of this part 3, is recognizing that we're all part of this deeper systems or context. Now, and I have a section there on media ecology and cultural evolution. The slide there, the medium is the message. That's the famous book by Marshall McLuhan. And the technology that communicates changes us. This is a much deeper and more radical version of how we view the world that's still not widely done. We typically think of, we think of TV, we think of the content, the programs that we watch. And what Marshall McLuhan said was a very radical thing. The medium is the message. We have to, and in our case, it's in a social, cultural context. In our world, that meant advertising. Yes, we made a devil's bargain early on when TV came around. We said, okay, we can have free programs as long as you get our propaganda in every level for the jingles about what you can buy. So the consumer economy absorbed that, because that's the cultural context in which the television medium arose. It's much more complex than that, but what I say the radical implication of this dictum is to redirect our attention to the social cultural context and implications of our languages, technologies, and communications media. One other clear example, we all have cars, or we typically do, we drive. Well, when cars came in, we built roads so the cars could go roads, could get us from point A to point B, but we also built suburbs because people wanted to get out of the cities, get a little fresh air, and that completely changed the architecture and the experience, the ecology, as it were, of urban areas with suburbia. So that's a technology, cars, that had the medium of cars resulted in the context of, well, people wanted to get out of these cities. And so and that whole development has had huge implications for the environment, for shopping, for malls, and the whole way the developers have made that happen. At the last paragraph, we are now free to ask, what are the effects of the medium of agriculture on cultures and civilizations? The effects of the clock on our sense of time, of literacy, especially the phonetic alphabet, on right and left hemisphere dominance, of social media on suburban teenagers, the effects of media on our consciousness. So another big frame, and I've written about this, so I'm trying to convert my writings over to medium.com, but if you think of the new sciences, the new physics, the evolution of the universe, that's the new sciences, okay? That's one piece of who we are. Another big piece is the social context, or the community, or the that we reside in, the society. So this medium is the message dictum, opens up a possibility for looking at societies at all levels. We'll get into more of this later. Instead of looking at it as just, well, this society is located here in a geography, and they accomplished this or that, or they have a growing economy or not. It's a way to look at how our consciousness is shaped by the communications media, the tools that are available, the resources that are available, the technology of the ship 500 years ago that Magellan sailed around the world, and the people in Italy and Spain and England and the Danes, started colonialization, which resulted in empires. Okay, so you get the idea. Looking at the world through a media ecology lens, it's another way to look at society, and we'll get into more of that later. But and then as an individual, we talked about William James, and the fact that, and the very first part I talked about, we've had 150 years of electronics and communications media that have evolved and created more awareness of the world. And then we've had 150 years since Freud and Jung and many others actually began to say, wait a minute, we're not just a separate individual with the world out there. We have all these, we have this unconscious that we've not been very aware of, and bringing the unconscious impulses to a consciousness so we can become better people, better participants, better communicators. A lot of that's inside us. There's a great book I always recommend, and I always think of it as, it's called The Heart's Code by Paul Pearsall. He's dead now. He lived in Hawaii for a while. Beautiful man. But he was a cardiologist. I learned about him because I have heart disease. But Paul Pearsall wrote this book because he discovered that when he was doing heart transplants, he said, wait a minute, it turns out about 15% of the people who have an organ transplant, not just hearts, the donor that received who accepted the donation, the donor organ, had a change in their personality that was linked to the psyche of the person who made the donor, who donated an organ. So Paul Pearsall said, what? How could that be? So that's another story, but it's a way to frame that the science, the society, and the individual are all kind of interacting in this new ecological mode of who we are and how we fit into the universe. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I forgot to put this slide in here. This is going to take me a little longer, but Robert Logan. Well, he's I think about Farrell's age now. So I picked a younger picture of him. I'm a big fan of him. He actually studied with Marshall McLuhan back in the 70s, and he has made wonderful contributions to the extension of this. So the book I put out there is The Extended Mind, The Emergence of Language, the Human Mind and Culture. So he's a prime example of a person who framed the way in which our communications media affect the evolution of language and culture. And so he wrote a book called The Sixth Language, And right before that, he wrote one called The Fifth Language. Now, just to summarize in a superficial way, we talked a little bit earlier about oral language to written language. Okay, so writing, speech is the first language. We're still fully human, we speak, and that's something that cuts across all human beings. Speech, the DNA, etc. Well, once we came up with writing and mathematics, which is come from the trade and interaction. Hey, you've got something I want. We work out a trading area. We develop cities, and as we got better at writing and writing down and accumulating the information, I mentioned this earlier, out of that collection of knowledge that came from our writing and our mathematics, which came out of the trade, we developed science, which was, he would call that so speech is the first, writing, math, 3, and so the fourth language is science. That's a language in itself, right? How to predict what's going to happen in the world. The fifth language is computers. And he wrote the book initially because he was thinking, well, wait a minute, computers are taking all of the content, and not just text, but audiovisual, and turning it into zeros and ones. Okay, so the medium of zeros and ones turns out to be a strategy that allows us to absorb and collect in one hard drive or in massive computers at the time all the knowledge in the world, so to speak. This was the original vision of the people who were involved in developing computers from the begin with. That's what motivated me back in the 70s to go to the Library of Information Science to study that. So that's the fifth language, but what happens out of the computers, it turns out the internet is the sixth language because it connects all of the computers, right? So all the knowledge and all the computers are internetworked through HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTML, markup language. So all of that code that Tim Berners-Lee put out in the public domain allowed us to quickly develop the graphic interfaces that make it easy to communicate, to play games, to do all the things we're doing today on the internet. Okay, so each part of this evolution had big impacts on society. And so this way of looking at it is a very profound and deep way to look at it. He does speculate that the next language might be, this is a little scary, virtual reality. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that it's being absorbed by, unfortunately, by Meta, the new evolution of Facebook. So again, what's the context of that? The internet was so exciting. We're going to create democracy and do all these cool things with the internet, and then it got absorbed in the consumer society. And we'll get into more of that in the last part 4. So it was really going to be fun. Okay, now I put this guy in there to introduce that there's an aspect of this evolution that is, quote, spiritual. And I don't want to shy away from that. That's my original Van Jones quote. It's not saying that the most cultural creatives are not necessarily, it's not religious necessarily in the traditional sense, but in the sense of there's a huge pattern of spiritual, but not religious, or, not part of a traditional religion entity with a creed and all that stuff. It's more individualized and it's connecting with nature, with the higher self, with the, okay, and this is a famous quote by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love, and then for a second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire. So, and he himself was a Catholic priest, okay. But he was also a geologist, and and a scientist in his own right, and a contributing one. And I love this as a way to communicate what I've been trying to talk about when we talk about the new science, that he comes out of the flowing forth, the Big Bang, this mysterious evolution from the origins of the universe. So he's saying, look at these layers of experience: geosphere, the molecules; biosphere, cells. Now we know we're made up of cells and bacteria. Atmosphere comes in and creates the opportunity for oxygenation the cells. This is all told in a wonderful book called The Universe Story by Brian Swim and Thomas Berry. And we'll be doing a whole series of that in the spring, I think, at the Unitarian Church, Farrell. Wanda Hambrick is going to organize that. And then above all, this big one here, the noosphere, is his famous term for the communications that have made us aware. So he's literally saying that the awareness, what Buckminster Fuller called our airway of knowing nowness through radio and TV and internet and all these communications media, he called the noosphere. And he's saying that that this is affecting our thoughts, and our thoughts are what allows us to, I hope, transition from where we've been to a more complex ecological view of ourselves and society and in the universe. Okay, and now, again, this is taking me a little longer because I stayed up late last night. I kept adding slides, This is Ken Wilber, and whether you've read him or not, he's really the guy who put the new age on steroids. He's a brilliant mind who wrote the integral. He wanted to come up with a comprehensive theory of everything, from that beginning of the universe and our consciousness and our participation in society. We'll get to that in a minute. So he's in his 80s now, and he's recovered from some health issue, which was probably cancer, but I don't really know that. He's active again. He had this health issue for like 10, 20, 15 years. And now he's back doing podcasts. But he was also an extremely fit person. And there's a picture of him when he was younger and in his prime. And the little quote is, relates to the old and the new physics. What traditionally we thought of the physics of the external world, he calls those dealing with both new and old physics were dealing with the shadow symbols, what he would call the archetypes, or the things that we don't, how we've actually evolved through evolution. But the new physics was forced to be aware of this fact. That's what all these scientists woke up and said, wait a minute, what I'm finding can't be true according to the old physics. Not that the old physics doesn't quote work, it does. We use the old physics to go to the moon and circle the earth. That's physics 101. My freshman year in college, I took physics, and they pointed out, yeah, this was in the time when we were doing this thing, like going around the sun, going around the earth. Okay, now, so here's a thing which brings a lot of this together, and I don't know if I might have another slide or two, but it's not attitudes, altitudes of development. If you look at the bottom first, he has this color-coded scheme to talk about the beginnings of the dawning of self-awareness, which he color codes as beige. It's the dawning self-awareness of humans. Survives through instinct, intuition, and banding with others. They came online about 250,000 years ago. That's our starting of humans. And speech, and we got together, and that's most of our history, of course. Now, the next one up is indigenous. And, the indigenous people had great insights, and we're recognizing that, as they often say, the indigenous North American Indians will say, hey, we're still here. The insights that we've had about our relationship to nature, you need to pay attention to, because you've screwed things up. The next one, if you think about the tribal, what he means by that is like what we're seeing in in like the Middle East, the warlords, in many societies, the indigenous people become, they get horses and they start, they're egocentric, they become aggressive, they're impulsive and ruthless, they're courageous, they're determined, they're powerful. So about 15,000 years ago, these people came to, they wiped out, they took over much of China, the Mongolian tribes. Again, not to go for the whole history of the humanity, I just want to cut through these high points. So traditional, ethno or nation-centric, values, rules, roles, and discipline, faith in a transcendent God or order, socially conservative. About 5,000 years ago, Judaism, the main religious traditions that we've developed are what he would call the traditional human state of organizational. In the evolution, again, these are evolving. One doesn't make the other false. He's very, he always points out in his lectures or whatever, if you start to pay attention to his work, it doesn't mean that one is superior to the other. It's an evolution of, and we have all of these inside us, so to speak, these impulses. So the orange is the modern values, rationality, and science. What Paul Ray and Sherry Anderson and the cultural creatives talks about that's the modern person, individualism and democracy, capitalism and materialism, risk-taking and self-reliance. So about 300 years ago, this came online, so to speak. That's what he means by online. That's when this kind of approach emerged. And then we get the where we are about the last 50 years, and this is a lot of what the transition to cultural creatives that Ray and Anderson were talking about. Postmodern, green, values pluralism and equality, relativistic and sensitive, civil rights and environmentalism, world-centric. So the last 50 years, we're kind of at the green level. Okay, now we come up to the what, and there's another person named Frederick Laloux who did this, translated this whole pattern of spiral dynamics, they call it, and related it to organizations. And he says within each area, these have organizational implications. And he would say, in the case of integral or teal, sees natural hierarchy and systems of systems, hold multiple perspectives, flexible, creative, and effective, leading edge of consciousness and culture. And that's what I would say that Simply Living and many of the organizations that are evolving now are moving into this area, the culture, including corporations, which are, they're becoming green. Some of them are really beginning to understand that they're part of systems. Even the bad guys you would think of that are killing the world right now, those corporations are beginning to wake up and realize that, no, we need to pay attention to more than our shareholder profits. Okay, so then the turquoise sees the world as alive and evolving. Well, that's us. We're so hip. Holistic and cosmocentric, lives from both individual self and transpersonal self. Emerging now. Okay, this is really what I've been talking about, that I think that the seeds have been sown in this evolution of cultures to create a new culture, which we're defining, we're figuring it out. Won't be one culture necessarily, but it may well move in the direction of this turquoise. Now he says the post-integral or indigo, he says that realizes oneness. Okay, we exhibit wisdom, joy, and love seen in saints and sages throughout history, theoretical and aspirational. So, right, we're not there, but that could be an aspirational aspect of the kind of world we're kind of trying to create. Okay, I know that's a lot to absorb. Okay, I guess I put this in. I had it originally broken out. I was getting tired of two different paragraphs, but okay. So I say in the text, what if these explorers on the edge of conventional consensus thinking are correct, that consciousness is evolving, that our culture, and those of us reading this, is evolving in response to the failure of the global corporate consumer culture. Like the Beringians, we talked about in part 1, and all cultures facing challenges to their traditions, including extinction, are we about to morph into something new? Okay, so I dropped all these names. Consider that the past couple of centuries have given us a rich history of scientists, artists, philosophers, and cultural creatives who challenged the age of discovery. Not everybody thought that the colonial imperialism was a good idea. And so we've had people, minority, the Industrial Revolution, the Romantics were revolting against the Industrial Revolution, or John Keats and poets and artists, the arts and crafts movement. We've always had people that felt the Industrial Revolution was crude, etc., dehumanizing, mechanical, factory work, etc. And more recently, the corporate economic technological inevitability of Western institutions, this behavior from our leadership, the establishment, quote unquote, who acts like we could just keep doing what we've been doing, this business as usual, because it's been so successful in making us happy with consumer goods. Okay, so then I started dropping these names, and these are just some of them. Leonardo, everybody knows Leonardo da Vinci, a true Renaissance man. And Goethe, Spinoza, brilliant philosopher who anticipated a lot of this oneness and unity. Emerson and Thoreau. Emerson was influenced by the Hindu oversoul concept from India. And so transcendental, that's an American version, really. The oversoul was what he called it, what they were talking about in India. Henri Bergson, French philosopher, wrote The Creative Evolution, one of the first persons to kind of go right at the concept that we're talking about. Marx, Freud, Jung, Whitehead, Wittgenstein, I won't give a talk about all of these people. Gregory Bateson, also a brilliant thinker and a person who, at the end of his life, super rational Bateson began to recognize that the spiritual aspect was something they had to accommodate. We've mentioned Fritz Capra. Lovelock and Margolis did the Gaia hypothesis, the idea that the Earth is alive, it's an organism. It's a hypothesis. Bruce Lipton invented, he's a cell biologist who discovered epigenetics, the fact that our DNA is not hardwiring our future environment as part of that. Candace Pert wrote Molecules and Emotion, which looked at the amazing role of hormones within our systems and how they affect who we are and what our experience is. David Corton, I think we talked about him with the evolution of the global economy and alternatives to that. Jeremy Rifkin wrote a great book called and you can watch this the YouTube version of the Third Industrial Revolution, brilliant projection of how we might bring a lot of this together. He also wrote a big, thick book on the empathic civilization. So he's not just looking at from the science aspect. Brian Swim, Thomas Berry, we've talked about, Charlene Spratnak, Richard Tarnas, who wrote a major book on archetypal astrology, as well as a textbook called The Passion of Western Man, who's it's widely used as a textbook in ordinary Western philosophy classes in both undergraduate and graduate level. But a lot of people, that's a bridge too far. The archetypal astrology. I happen to be a fan. Charles Eisenstein. Eisenstein is, I think of as the next generation who's begun to recognize, he's also a brilliant, a genius guy who's written big, thick books and established his reputation as a genius, but he's also recognizing that the spiritual and the activists need to come together. Dwayne Elgin, author of the first Voluntary Simplicity, the recognition that there's wisdom and simplicity, This is a trend that he studied at SRI and at Stanford, documented that. Jaron Lanier, inventor of virtual reality, is now recognizing, along with Douglas Rushkoff, that we need to back off the AI version of doing whatever we can do in science. We need to come back to being human beings. You can name more. The point of dropping all the names is to underscore that the emergence of a new culture, if one were to succeed in replacing the dominant consumer culture, has very deep roots. And that's, oh, okay, so I guess I didn't quit. The 1960s, I think, as the harbinger of ecological culture. And if you think of times when, I don't know, the stars aligned, I think I joke in the article that well, we didn't really create the, we had Reagan and Nixon instead of the age of Aquarius. It didn't manifest right away. But if you think about civil rights and integration in a multiracial society, women's rights, feminism, patriarchy, the environment, pollution, protections and regulations, and anti-war, anti-nuclear, and anti-establishment question authority practices, these movements continue to inspire activists working today on these same issues and the challenges of climate change, income inequality, divestment from fossil fuels, worker rights and unions, international trade agreements, and more. So this activism of that time is still going on. Those little images are ways to say, you know, kind of take you from Kennedy's assassination, and there's a little John was so sad. Even I worked in DC when Kennedy was president, and every day I would walk into the office and see this big picture of Kennedy saying, "Ask not what what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country." And I saw Carolyn Kennedy on the lawn in the back of the White House. Anyway, it takes you kind of through Martin Luther King changes, the Vietnam War. I don't know if that's Jimi Hendrix or what, and then Man on the Moon. So it was an amazing era to live through. And I'm sure Farrell remembers it maybe better than I do. And so I guess I did this one last quote from the culture. This is from another person who continuing the work of Ray and in the original book, The Cultural Creatives, are the carrier population of the emerging wisdom culture. Across the planet, there are innovators for the culture, not so much in technologies as in beliefs, worldviews, values, and ways of life. They are the opinion leaders and the participants in all the new social movements of the past 60 years and have time and again shaped others' views, practices, and adoptions of these new ways. Their green values and lifestyles and their value of inner development, both psychological and spiritual, are the key to the emerging new culture. New cultural creative surveys in Europe, Japan, and the US all show the same trends. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I don't know how that probably took more time than I intended, but there's a lot. I feel like unpacking that is really important because I think it, to me, is the essence of how we, my obsession is to figure out some strategy that we really could get to where we need to go. And I'm the first to be skeptical. I mean, we may not make it, you know, this nuclear threat that's going on right now. I mean, you know, you can't just, it's not just a matter of dreaming the future or manifesting it, but we can work in the direction that I feel we are evolving. So we have a new understanding of the universe. We have a new understanding of society and how we're influenced by our tools and our communications and our culture. How as an individual, psychologically, we have all kinds of strategies. We were involved in Simply Living with the nonviolent communication folks, and I was a friend of Jeff Brown before he moved away. Jeff. That's really a practical way when people struggle with whatever issues they've had in their past. We all have them, right? And learning to communicate, that's really a spiritual practice, even though it has nothing to do with spirituality per se. But it's the same kind of process that a good Buddhist or, you know, an opportunity to become honest and open and really an ability to share your deepest insights and thoughts and concerns with your partner or friend or whatever. We have all these techniques for getting there, I think, but it's got to come together in a more coherent way so that people who are the activists and the people who are psychologically were doing their inner work, which is important, and it's the same for the activists. They need to take care of themselves. They don't want to burn out. So we have to get those people together, as Van Jones quote. The fate of humanity now rests in the activists becoming more spiritual and the spiritual people becoming more active. And I think we can get there. And when people say, Chuck, you just make lemonade out of the worst things, I have to say, well, if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you're just going to let this thing happen, play out, because you feel like you don't have any influence, we can reinvent our communities, we can reinvent our suburbs, we can reinvent our transit. And I'm just finishing up almost an article that I'm revising called Modern Money Theory, MMT Economics, and the key to funding a Green New Deal and address the progressive agenda. So until we get that, it's very hard to be optimistic. But again, it's a tool we have. It's the new economics. There's a lot of new economics, but that's the fiscal piece we need to quit people thinking the old gold standard idea of money. It's not that way anymore. We're the issuer of currency. Joe Biden just proved it, right? And so did Bush 1 and Obama when they did their $1 trillion bailouts for the banks. We can do it for us, and we can do it for climate intervention, and we can do it for we can make sure everybody has health care. We can do it by getting the majority of people in Congress to vote for it, and the Federal Reserve will issue the currency, and we can make it happen. We can avoid inflation because we know that it's not about balanced deficits, it's about balanced economy to make sure that when we put the money out there, it's being used effectively to make the changes that we need to have happen. And I'm done. So okay, I have a as I say, a kind of compulsion about this. But what do you guys think?
Wow. That's what I think.
Hey, what do you think?
As I was listening to your presentation, Chuck, I was thinking at different times. I know, and I work online. I'm a web developer, so I kind of have a skewed perception of technology. I'm overly techie, So yeah, I'm really techie, and so I kind of think in those terms. But like the medium, the new technology of the virtual meeting that we're on now, for example, and now socially, or even as far as educationally, we're able to attend meetings that we weren't able to make logistically. We couldn't book all these meetings in a day; it was impossible. And now we're actually able to meet with people and able to exchange ideas, whereas I would never make most of my meetings. I had to actually physically be there because that's what it is. But now we're able to do that and exchange ideas. This has also changed how we work, because you were talking about how people got cars and then there was sprawl. Everybody wanted to live in the suburbs and go out there, get some fresh air and not live in the city. Well, now that people can work from home via the internet, a lot of the commuting, the need to go into the office in the city is not, for some, not everyone, but for some is not there anymore. A lot of commercial properties gonna have to be converted. There's less pollution from the people that don't need to commute. And I think that has other implications as well. For in the last 80 years or so, we've lost a lot of population from small towns and rural communities, where it used to be vibrant small towns and everyone ends up leaving for the city because that's where the opportunities and the vibrant economies are. And now with the internet, small towns have seen an opportunity, especially after post-pandemic, to bring people back into small towns as long as they have broadband, and that's why that's so important. They can attract people who work remotely into the small towns for their quality of life. They get lots of fresh air and nice outdoor settings and whatnot. And so I think that's changing that paradigm, and how we think of work and where we live and play and so forth. I also think of how technology has changed media, because we didn't have YouTube before. Now, before it was very top down, one way broadcasting. You had people in the establishment making the stories, and they had all the access to the broadcasting. And now you have YouTube creators creating some of them. It's really crappy content, and some of it rises to the top and is better, and you can get some really good creative access that wouldn't have seen the light of day, and nobody would have been able to see it otherwise. But they, with relatively few resources, it opens up the citizen journalists and so forth. So I think those are hopeful things in my view that help to reshape culture, and ideas, and put the more ecological thoughts out there, even though they're not necessarily monetized or lucrative. They're not backed by a big corporation. That's my 2 cents.
Great thoughts.
I've been over here trying to get my head around, America's, the way our Constitution set up our government. We have the 2-party system, right? And it's kind of hard to change that, the way the Constitution sets up our legislature. And then you look at our media, our mainstream media is very much going the way of, either your Fox News or your CNN. And it kind of mirrors that, the government, because so much of our dollars in our economy are dependent on how our Congress votes on certain things and the lobbyists there. And, and that filters down to, if you spend any time on Facebook, it's everybody on the right and left, that 20% of the minority on the right and left fighting each other. So I had not actually heard of the cultural creatives before. And I saw it on a different, one of your weekly things. And I'm thinking, I'm not a cultural creative, because I'm thinking I'm not a creative type. I thought it was artistic, right? So when I did the deeper read, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm totally there. And no wonder I felt homeless, pretty much my whole adult life.
Yeah.
And so how do we, in order to change culture, we need to all be marching the same way, right? And all working on the same goals and all sharing the same message, in order to influence others. And right now we don't have a home. We don't have a cultural creative leader, right? And well, we got you, but a whole infrastructure like the politicians have to get things moving. So, those are the things that have been going through my mind.
It's interesting about the Constitution. I used to teach American history, government, and there was early warnings from the founding fathers about factions.
Yeah.
James Madison. So, and we've had that right along, factions. But if you think about the cultural creators being not so much ideology, not left, not right, but ecological or problem solving. Things are complex. What's a wise way to do it? How can we engage people that know something to have a real participation and discussion? So we have Bernie Sanders, and we have the squad, or whatever they call. These people are not really, well, they're called by the media far left, but they're
Yeah.
really saying, let's get money out of politics. Let's quit having corporations own us. Let's make decisions on the basis of what's a good policy. And they're saying it's just no brainer. This, I like to say that the new culture is really a lot of it's common sense. It's not going to be so crazy. What kind of culture would not want to give everybody opportunity to get healthy, get well? What kind of culture would allow people not to get enough food to eat for kids? What kind of culture would not want everybody to have a decent home with clean water? These are things that we don't have because we've failed the systems we have now, this old science saying you can do whatever you want and grow and exploit, and it's not working. And these systems are failing. And I think the ecological solutions are surfacing. Like just take architecture as an example. Early on, Frank Lloyd Wright and introduced the idea of organic architecture, meaning integrating it, your experience of the building, the home, as part of nature, part of the environment. Okay, in the falling waters and that building in nature, making it open to it. Now we've got architects that are talking about living buildings that are net positive in terms of energy, green roofs, and so completely redesigning the built environment, or just rehabbing it. The Germans have come up with a whole protocol for making the walls in our homes thicker so that we can have almost very little need for heat or cooling, because they've got these passive energy solutions from the way we build things to begin with. And you can do it with an existing structure. And again, these would be productive things to do. We can plant trees, we can do a lot of things to restore what we've had. In restorative justice, we can realize that we've made all these, the whole racist thing that's come out, especially since George Floyd. But as Farrell points out, our parents, I grew up in a home too, where, racism was not allowed. And I think, now a lot of white people are getting it that weren't getting it before. And again, it's awareness level, oh yeah, finally we recognize that African Americans are not only better athletes, they can also be nuclear physicists, like what's his name? It used to be a joke, right? Something about what do you call an African American, nuclear physicist or something? Just some terrible name, but that's, we've had, for all the bad things about Bill Cosby, he showed that there were families just like the rest of us, right? Father, kids, normal things that growing up, and we're beginning to see that more, but we're still isolated, and we don't have communities that are fully integrated, but that we have to work toward that.
I don't know if Michael wanted to say anything there, but not yet. I can just say that, the whole thing that you have presented, and even what Tammy and Maida said, they're very beautiful visions. And I am completely in agreement with that and what needs to be done. The one problem, however, that we face right now is extinction. Our time now is very limited. And some of the really wonderful people that I know have told me recently, forget it, we're doomed, it's over. We don't have a chance anymore. That's what they're saying. And these are people who up until now would never have said that, but now they're looking at the clock and saying, we're doomed, it's too late now. So the only thing I can do as an individual is, struggle against that, which is what I'm trying to do by working now, on climate change, because That's the only hope I have, really, that any of the cultural creativity that you are describing, which we so badly need, has a possibility in the future.
Farrell, I have a thought in response that we are doomed, but humans have come through many hardships through our evolution and have adapted very well, surprisingly well, almost too well. So I think that adaptation is one of those cultural creative superpowers that we have. And we've been through the ice age and other things before that. And so I think there has been a lot of changes. I don't know that, short of maybe a total nuclear annihilation, that kind of thing, the climate change is not completely without opportunity for adaptation. And I think that there's going to have to be adaptation. There's going to have to be changes made to be more ecological. I think it's a mix of both at this point, because I think we're kind of getting to the threshold of that extra 3 degrees Fahrenheit, and then there are going to be changes that we're not going to be able to stop, like you said. It's going to be pretty massive changes, but I think adaptation is one of our strengths. And
So
well, for those very 12 special people who lived through all this, I guess that'll be a big burden on their shoulders. Whether they will, I think of the ice age and all those things you just said, and I gotta think about that longer and harder, probably, to think about, yes, they evolved, and language and all the things we study and talk and teach and all that about how all this evolution happened. I guess maybe I just think of us, this planet is just going to be on fire. It's going to burn up. There isn't going to be, I don't know, maybe there could be adaptation. I mean, there are things when things burn down, things have grown back. I mean, that is true. I guess I just don't know enough about what's going to happen. I just think of it being on fire, but I wasn't thinking that we were doomed. And that. So I think I probably was hanging on to whatever kind of, some kinds of solutions that I guess we've been talking about or working towards, or some combination of that for some time. So I'll have to think about your words, Farrell, and I know you're in some very important circles. So if you're hearing that and you've been more involved in the movement than I have, I think I'm wanting to resist that, because I want to be hopeful. I mean, I don't see going on and going forward and waking up every day if I don't have that. So I can't quite give in to the idea of doomed, but at the same time, I don't quite think that we're going to evolve in the optimistic way that you were expressing, but I'm just stuck there right now. But so thinking of those things are different from what you were presenting, and that, because your hopeful presentation, Chuck, is that we'll somehow do all of these things and come together. The slide that you had that had all those names of people, I 3 times typed into the chat and then erased it. Why are there so many white males listed in all of this movement? That is, are there no indigenous peoples? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe some of those people are, and I don't know it, because I certainly didn't know all the people listed. But I find that so many things that I've been a part of, before I get down to finding any women who've been involved, I first have to get through the white males. And I don't know whether it's because that's who gets published or who's likely to be heard. We have centuries of writing. Some of them are long, some of them are short, and that. So anyway, it's not really, I don't even know if I'm right. I just, many of the people that you noted, I know that about. I do not know if they if they were in today's time, if they would identify as male or female the way we do in a binary way. So I don't know that, but thinking in my old ways, I wondered about that and wondered if the contributions of ideas might be even wider, were the representation to be even wider.
Well, that's great feedback, Michael, and I did include a few women in there, but I tuned into this, and actually I have a project that I would love to have. First of all, I think actually the last 50 years, 40 years, women have been the leaders in almost every area. So for example,
Yeah.
in economics, Hazel Henderson is a brilliant woman who was discriminated against from the very beginning, and she's British. There's a woman that did an amazing book on cooperative businesses and employee-owned businesses, a brilliant book. Judy Wicks is one of the founders of Business Alliance for Local Living Economies. The woman who really started the whole thing about discovering the goddess in Europe, fought against the ridiculous anthropologists that wouldn't pay attention to her, and eventually she finally got published. But that, and Charlene Spretnak, you know, she's also a leader in the whole movement, and I'm sure has experienced her issues dealing with that. I know that I've read quite a bit about Candace Pert, who's also a woman who has completely changed the way we think about the impact of at the hormonal level, and how that works. The Molecules of Emotion is the book, that landmark book, but you know, she faced all kinds of discrimination. So it's certainly true. So what I would love to see is a photograph in a museum of each of these women who are creating the future. Native Americans, Winona LaDuke, she's a true leader right now. She's been in Columbus, and anyway, have a picture of them with just a paragraph explaining their contributions, so people could walk through a room of these portraits and see. Or it could just be done online. That's what all I've done so far, is just to find images, and because I think that I'm not thinking of all of them right away, but I do know that in
You couldn't. I mean, I don't think you could do that. That's sort of the point.
Yeah.
And that, because there's all the viewpoints from younger people, you know, it's like for where they are in their development and
Right.
writing. We have so many young people right now who it's their lives. They're the ones who are going to see the fire, the burn. I'm going to be dead, most likely. So they're going
Right,
to watch
exactly.
this thing fall down, burn down, flood, and that. And I'm not saying I won't see any of it. We're already seeing it. I mean, I'm not like in it right at the moment, but I mean on the news and that kind of thing. But I guess I'm with you, and I mean, maybe I'm kind of not fully understanding the purpose of the 4-part series. It's possible that I'm not totally on, like, in the same wavelength, and that I came because you were doing it and I wanted to get to know you more, and that wasn't maybe the fullest way to come to a learning session. So that's a good thing, but not that. So it could be that, and I don't want anything to be interpreted as any kind of criticism. It was just something I noticed. It was such a long list of people, and I was a little bit overwhelmed, to be honest. And then what happened in my brain was, I can't take all those names. I don't know how you had time to read them all, but I don't know at 61 how I'm going to have time to go read them all now while things are burning and that. And so then then my mind went to the safe place, which was, oh, what's not there? What am I not hearing? What am I not seeing? Because that's easier. I can manage that.
Good feedback. That's
I can
absolutely
manage
right.
that.
And I'll have to relook at that slide if I do this again. Definitely, you know, it's a great point. And I feel like, and of course, you don't have to. I mean, I've been reading this stuff for whatever. So at least 50 years I've been reading this stuff.
Right, right, yes,
So I
that's
had a
true.
head start, and that's my background. I read this stuff, but I will say that in the next part, the big framework at the part 4 is whether we're going to go into it's an extension. This is Thomas Berry's framework. Are we going to pursue business as usual? And he calls that the Technozoic era. We're entering a new era. And the other alternative is an Ecozoic era. Okay, so my point in this next section is to get people to begin to see that we can't keep, I think everybody agrees, you can't keep doing business as usual, but it's a little more subtle than that. It's hard to recognize exactly all the ways in which, for example, I like to use the example of the big pharma, these and big food. These are captured agencies that are we're not regulating monopolies, because now we're starting to make that happen, hopefully. Meghna Chakrabarty, my hero, there's another woman for you, brilliant. She does On Point on NPR. She did a whole week of the impact of monopolies on a democracy. And it's not just about cheaper goods that are efficiently part of the global economy. Anyway, okay, so for example, in the case of big ag, we need to stop the Monsanto Bayer work. There's ways to do that. For example, and I know it's after time, I'll stop the clock here in a minute. But for example, I mentioned the modern money theory. This is not just coming from me making this up. I get this from a conference I went to at that Bill McKibben and David Orr put together in Overlands a few years ago. And the guy's name is Gar Alperovitz. He's a political economist. I think he's a retired academic, but he points out that we could simply make an offer to the shareholders of these failing corporations that are killing the planet, buy them off with with MMT. Here's your money. Okay, now we own Monsanto, and we're going to quit trying to do the insane things of owning the seed and then owning them, not making them available except for monetizing them. It's an insane thing to do. The same for, we have all the documentation, which has even been on PBS, of millions of dollars that have been spent deliberately for disinformation about the oil and gas industry. So people still think it's an issue. It's not an issue. Ecologically, there's a solution, and it means we need to transition. We can make the same offer to Exxon. They're faced with all kinds of lawsuits. They can't monetize these assets. They've got to leave them in the ground. They can't make this argument to their shareholders. They're getting sued by their shareholders. Make them an offer from the federal government, pay them off, and then we own Exxon, which and tell the people, okay, just as during World War II, we forced the car manufacturers to quit making cars during World War II. They made tanks, and we can retool, is my point. We can retool factories. We know we have amazing skills at strategic planning. We just have done a lot of dumb things with that knowledge because we didn't look at the environment, as we didn't scan the environment to pay attention to what the downsides were for our plants. But we can reverse a lot of this stuff. I have great faith in Paul Hawken, and to try to again one more regeneration, his latest book, the Drawdown.org project, where he looks at the holistic version of how we can reverse climate change, not just, a lot of it is baked in, that's right now, but we can reverse it through educating girls, for example. A lot of people don't make that connection with climate change, but girls are educated, and instead of having 12 kids to go in the city and work in a factory for $2 a day or whatever, they'll have fewer kids. And that just population is something we don't talk about. The Catholic Church has made that a taboo, just like Farrell and I were talking about earlier with Jewish Voice for Peace. You can't criticize Israel. It's just a taboo. Well, you can't criticize Saturday Night Live just did a thing on mask. What's a funny kind of thing somebody brought up. Well, maybe they didn't have the full science, or the mess, and everybody reacts at the dinner table. What? Anyway, we have to have honest conversations.
Chuck, I know I'm interrupting. I don't know. Did maybe Tammy or Maida wanted to say something? I had just a couple little things. One is, I'm aware of the doom, Maida, but I'm not accepting that. I want you to know that I'm not accepting that idea. Second of all, what Michael was saying, a lot of those names that are, those great people whom I admire too, are in the past for the most part. Not all of them, some are still around. But if I have a feeling, if your concept of what might be actually becomes some part of reality, women will be the leaders in that in the future. I really believe that. And I think that it's showing up now, all around that women are becoming in places where they have not been before and are doing things that they did not do before and are leading in many ways. And I think that's going to grow and grow. And that's a very good sign. That's it.
Another person
Sorry.
I need to add is Rianne Eisler, who's a partnership way. Even in corporations, they have to recognize that women are just better managers. They're more collaborative. They get things done in ways that ego-oriented men who harass women don't. So anyway, yeah, great points. And I know it's late, 8:47. Anybody else want a last word? We're not leaving on the doom. We're going to do what we can to make it happen. Michael, what's his name? Dowd, D-O-W-D. He's leading post-doom conversations, and we're getting beyond it. Vicki Robbins doing presentations for resilience.org is called What Could Possibly Go Right. So she's interviewing thought leaders. And Vicki Robin is one of those, speaking of brilliant women. So anyway, I think a small group, but fun. In a way, it's better to have a small group. Appreciate everybody's input. And hopefully you'll come back next week. An exciting evolution of the Technozoic era versus the Ecozoic era. Same big frame, but kind of drill down a little bit on what that means, and it'll be fun.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great ideas.
Good to see you all.
Bye.
Okay, I
Bye.
gotta stop recording.